Let's do that. All right, good evening, everybody. It's just 6:29.5, so I thought we'd make a start. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Melton Borough Council Scrutiny Committee. Members are reminded that we'll be using the audio-visual system this evening, and the meeting will also be streamed to our mass audience live on YouTube. Members are asked to physically raise their hands in the usual way to indicate they wish to speak, and to use their microphones when speaking for the benefit of all present. The microphone is live when the red light displays. Please switch mobile phones to silent. Should you need to leave the room during the meeting, unless it is an emergency evacuation when the emergency exits should be used, please use the marked exit and entrance. I will now provide a reminder of the evacuation procedure. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, please leave by one of the 6 emergency exits around the sides of the chamber. Please assemble at the far side of the front car park nearest the park entrance. Officers will be on hand to assist persons who require any assistance. Public recording of the meeting. There is legislation that allows the public to film, record, or use social media at a council meeting. This must not be disruptive to the good order of the meeting, nor include any filming or recording of the public seating area. That's the formalities out of the way. First item on the agenda, apologies for absence.
Yes, I can confirm I've received no apologies.
Okay, thank you. Item 2, minutes of the last meeting, which have been obviously circulated. Before asking for confirmation, does anyone wish to raise anything regarding accuracy of those minutes? No. Are you happy to confirm them as a correct record? Can I just have a show of hands? Improve the minutes. Thank you. All right, declarations of interest. This is to invite members who wish to do so to make any declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda for this meeting. Just note that a member with a personal interest must declare the interest at the beginning of the meeting, but can take part in the debate. A member with a disclosable pecuniary interest or a pecuniary interest has to declare it and cannot take part in the debate and should leave the room during debate on that item. Are there any declarations? None. Thank you. So, move on to item 4, which is a standing item on this agenda, which is to review of the forward plan. And with your papers, you've had details of cabinet decisions that have been either scheduled, have been taken, or are scheduled to be taken in the appropriate period. Are there any comments on that? Excellent. We'll move on to item 5. And that's the mid-year review of the scrutiny work programme. Review of the scrutiny work. It is work, isn't it? Review of the scrutiny work programme is a standing item on the agenda, as you know, but we did agree at the beginning of the year when we set the current work programme that we'd, in particular, around this time in November, just take time to review the programme as it stands, but also to consider whether there are any additional items that, in the light of more recent developments or issues that have arisen, members feel they'd like to have included. So this is an opportunity to consider the relevance or not of the existing programme and its content, including the scheduling of items. And on that note, we've actually should have been looking at the homelessness strategy tonight, but that's been deferred because of other work pressures. The report was not available for this meeting. So we already do reschedule things, but it's also a chance to look at additional items. That's Simon creeping. Now, in respect to the latter point on additional items, I have received representations from a number of members of the committee and indeed members who aren't on this committee regarding issues that they feel they would like to see included in the work programme. One of these relates to the operation of the waste contract and flows from concerns that various members have voiced. in respect of the service level agreements, the monitoring, and how problems are addressed and resolved. The second item, it relates to a request to review the council's complaints processes and procedures. Again, that links through to some of the issues that have come up in recent times. And then thirdly, a look at social housing and in particular respect to the bidding process, but also some wider issues in regards to that. And in a moment, I'll ask some members who've approached me on these to just elaborate on why they want to see them included in the work programme, and what sort of scope they would like to see covered. I'd just like to emphasise that it's open to all members to comment on these proposals, and indeed to raise any other issues that haven't been previously flagged to me that they think ought to be in the work programme. But before opening up for debate, there's just a couple of points I want to make. The Scrutiny Committee is not the Council's Complaints Committee. Our role is to look at policies and strategies, and to make informed comment for the benefit of the decision making and policy formulation in the council. And whilst I understand that on some of these issues, members may want to example issues that have arisen with their residents, you know, I'd ask you to keep that in general terms rather than try and get into specifics of individual cases that have been brought to your attention. And secondly, in considering any changes to the work programme, we have to bear in mind that there are resource issues and resource implications. So we can't keep loading things onto the work programme. There are consequences in terms of the pressures that puts on ourselves, but more particularly on the officers. So if we do agree to modify the programme, that will necessarily involve looking at some of the existing items on it with a view to either deferring or deleting them from the programme. And I've had some discussion with officers regarding that, and have identified a couple of areas where we could perhaps see some leeway to do so. So that's just a way of prefacing our discussion on this. Could I first invite Councillor Cliff to comment on the request to include review of the waste contract?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So myself and my fellow ward councillors, Councillor Atherton and Councillor Adcock, have received a number of communications around waste collection with regard to particular bins. But I think why this is important is that waste collection is one of those kind of bread and butter council services that is seen a lot by residents, and is and actually leads to quite a negative experience of people's living environments. The particular location that was in trouble in the Sizenby ward, there was an awful lot of dog mess on the ground, and also the presence of rats as well. And it was really deeply unpleasant, particularly for parents walking children near that bin on the way to school. And we had a number of emails with regard to this. So we would really like to scrutinise the BIFA contracts. There was some anecdotal, I don't know whether to call it evidence at this stage, that's perhaps quite a strong word to use, but there was some feedback that BIFA had seemingly cut down the collections, were not collecting adequately, were not responding to complaints, were not doing their job properly, and we are aware that the contract is up for renewal soon, and so we just think it would be wise and a good time, a good use of our resources to scrutinise the service level agreements and how well BIFA has performed under the current contract before any decisions taken as to whether to renew services with them next time round. I don't know whether my colleague Councillor Atherton has got anything to add.
As Councillor Cliff already mentioned, we had quite a number of complaints regarding not just the dog bins, but also the green bins, of people wanting to know why they're paying twice as much than anywhere else. People talk to each other, have relatives and friends in different parts of the country, and they'll all communicate with each other, and they're paying twice as much here than they do elsewhere. So maybe looking at the whole contract and the service that we want to make it user-friendly for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. So just trying to pull that together. So it's looking at what the contract requires by way of performance, but perhaps also looking at whether there needs to be some reflection on whether it needs some additions around the service to actually make the term you used was user friendly. I think that's the Cliff. You know, I don't know whether I'm looking at Simon because I know he's had some issues as well. Whether he wants to comment on.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add, just to support Councillor Cliff and Councillor Afton's comments. There's two different things with Biffa. One is the actual waste collection service is that there seems to be a lot of like collection missed across the borough. Speaking to Councillor Carter a few weeks ago, he's had the same in his ward in Ashfordby. I emailed the council leader a few weeks ago, and he didn't mind me saying because he's in and out, but he said to me that he's getting complaints from all across the borough's council leader with complaints of collection. So it seems quite a widespread problem. It's not just my ward, Bet Mill Court. But another thing as well is, I know it has improved recently with street cleaning. I know the Councillor Glancy's had a meeting with the new Assistant Director for Environmental Services, Russell Smith, regarding street cleaning. But certainly for the last several years, in my ward, I've had to email often the team, Amanda Hume, Jodie Farlow's team, regarding streets and alleyways across my ward, certainly actually the town area, that aren't being cleaned at all. So I have to keep emailing them every 3 months to say, look, this is so bad now, you've got to have it cleaned. To say, all right, we will. So they will ring Biffa, tell them to come out, they'll come and do it, but it's a constant. So I think now it's improving, by the way. I just think that's something just to, I think just from your point, Chair, because that's a very good point, you know, sort of how do we want to go about this? It isn't a complaint service, this committee. We just need to make sure that as per our contract with them, that we are doing everything that they are supposed to do in the time frames, etc. And like Councillor Cliff said, the complaints, and yourself, the complaints procedure is improved, because I don't think it's great, to be honest. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else wish to add to the comments already made?
I'd just like to add, in the rural villages, I'm not sure what Councillor Sharp find, but in the rural villages, we have no problem at all. They're beavering away until, well, 5:30 on a Friday, and they're very civil, and I've never come across anyone complaining. So I'm very fortunate, clearly. So it's a good service in our village, and same with there. Yeah. Got a different team, or I don't know, but we're happy.
Always glad to hear about happy people. Anybody else wish to add to the discussion? Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, around my area, because I live on Chapel Street, I find the same as what this councillor just said about how good they are, and they're regularly coming round when they should do, and I love the way that they do it now with the flats, because they've got like some storage in the middle, some storage places. Instead of leaving them at your door, instead of leaving your rubbish at the door, you can actually take it not far, just a few metre or so round the corner, put it all in there, and it's out the way. And it's really good. It's working really well. So I'm pleased with that. Wonderful.
Any additional comments?
Again, sorry, just quickly, I just want to come to me. I know that the government about 3 weeks ago, they announced a whole new collection coming in a few years' time, where it's going to have 3 bins across the country. And what I've read of it, it does seem really, really good, actually. It does seem every part of the country now is going to have the same collection service: food, waste, green, possible. I think with the collection with green waste, it's up to the council of your area whether they adopt it or not. But certainly because I know sort of councils next to us in Lincolnshire, they've got like 4 bins: 1 grey, 1 brown, grey, black. So I think it's better. I think just in terms of our scrutiny, I think we'll see how that comes about, and then, because I personally think it's a very good thing. Thank you.
I think perhaps it could be more difficult anticipating what may come along as opposed to looking at what currently exists. But I don't know. Do you want to offer any suggestions, Michelle?
No, thank you. Thank you for the feedback. I think it's a really constructive and positive item for the committee if you wanted to look at that. And I think based on the feedback you've given this evening, I can work with the team around defining a scope, playing that back to you to make sure it meets your requirements, addressing some of the I guess the facts around the contract and what is required, what isn't required, some of those improvements that are being made. So more than happy to do that. And I think it would be sensible to touch on some of the regulatory changes that are coming down the road as well, and how those how that county-wide strategy is being implemented. Just a couple of notes of caution. So one is that the contract is not up for review until 2028. So still a fair way left on that. And the other thing is that the green waste charges were something agreed by council at the point of letting that contract. And there are some constraints and complexities there. But again, the report can address that. So no issue with that. And if you decide to have it on your work programme, with your permission, I would ask colleagues that deliver that service directly to be part of the discussion on the evening. So thank you.
Thank you. Right, I won't ask for a decision yet because we've got other items to discuss, and then we have to see how we knit that together in terms of scheduling. So could I invite, if there's nobody else wants to comment on that item, can I invite Councillor Thwaites, who wishes to make some proposals regarding the review of the complaints procedure and the social housing?
Thank you, Chair. Both of these items, they come with the same caveat, or I suppose really, that in the fact that many of us, if not all, were elected on being a more transparent organisation, but also making sure we're looking at our performance and making sure what we're using is the best of breed, and making sure we're actually giving value and service to our residents. So the first one is the complaints procedure, and I echo what you're saying earlier, that in the fact that it shouldn't be a witch hunt, or we're using individual complaints to follow this through. But this is just to look at the actual process, right from where that complaint, however that actually comes in, whether that's at the front desk, whether that's by email, how we then process it, how we then allocate it to the relevant parties, and then reporting on the resolution and the open, and just to see how that's going. So it's actually, we can actually say to our residents, we are handling their complaints, we are managing those complaints. So I think we are, but we need to make sure we know that's transparent, and so we can actually show it. And if necessary, make changes to that process so that we can produce better value, better efficiency. And that comes to the same with the second process as well, which is about the social housing allocation. And that's not just council houses, that's everything through to, say, extra care. So all of those, and it's making that process, or being able to scrutinise that process to make sure, are we aware of it? Do we understand it? Is it the best of breed? Can we actually say that as actually giving us the resolutions? And are we able to look at those reports and take confidence in those reports? So that's the two areas that I would like to put in. And that's, as I said, the whole complaints procedure and the social housing allocation, because in the background, that's a lot of the conversations that I'm getting from different councillors. And I think they would be two good areas, because they're two major areas where our residents contact the Borough Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from other members of the committee before I say anything? Councillor Lumley.
Yeah, just to add on Councillor Thwaites' excellent points, I do agree with him. I think I brought it up in the last committee, but when just at our complaints procedure, I don't want to criticise any officers because I know they're very hard working, it's just they are following a process. But when I wasn't getting a response after quite some months from several issues, I had to go down the complaints route at Melton Borough Council. So I emailed complaints@melton.gov.uk. And how it was, it seemingly, there was an officer that replied back to me and they just passed it on to the team again. So they didn't act as a complaint service, they were acting as just like an officer at Melton Borough Council passing it on. So that's what I found, because after I still didn't get a response, I had to go back to the complaints team and said, oh, okay, Simon, I'll ask them to reply back to you. So, but I wanted them to, like, I guess, try get an outcome to my complaint and then reply back to me as a proper team. So that needs to be looked into if that makes sense. But I mean, I'm talking about from a councillor point of view, but obviously from the public, they don't know that email address, so they have to go down another route. So, but I'm sure it goes to the same team, but I'm just concerned that might be the same problem from the public. Thank you.
Any other observations, comments, input on either of those? Okay. I mean, I don't particularly want to comment on the two, but it does seem to me that in any areas where we're hearing from the people we represent and the people we work with, you know, in the council, concerns about processes and service operation, that seems to me a fairly good green flag for Scrutiny, wanting to have an interest in that. It seems to me that's part of what we should be about. So I would certainly support those 3 items being included in the work programme. If we do that, though, we've got to look at what we are going to move out of the work programme, and you've got it, you know, or you've had it circulated as always with the agenda. There are 2 specific proposals regarding changes that I'd like to suggest, and there are 2 items, you know, further down the road. One is the homelessness strategy, and I'll explain on that one in a moment. And the other one is the light bulb project. Now, both were included in the work programme. Neither of them are unimportant. But in terms of the homelessness strategy, well, obviously it's important that we have a process in Melton to deal with homelessness. I think we know that the extent of the issue in the town is relatively small. And I think we can have reasonable confidence the officers are dealing with, as they were early the other morning when they went out to check, you know, all the nooks and crannies in the town to see if there are any rough sleepers, and didn't find any. So I don't, it doesn't to me have that sense of urgency that we should be concerned that we aren't acting appropriately as an organisation on that. And similarly with the light bulb project, I don't think it's critical to that project moving forward that we have it in our work programme for this year. So, you know, if the committee were minded to include these 3, I think that gives us some leeway. I'm not suggesting we necessarily delete them from the programme, but we could move them further back down the line. Other than that, when you look at the programme, we've got a number of hefty things coming up, not least the budget process. And you know, clearly we're not going to not undertake our role in respect of that. So that really needs to stay in. And also, and dare I say, as I see him, you know, beavering over his computer in the back, we dearly love the leader to come and make his annual presentation to Scrutiny. And I think that's actually quite important for us to have an opportunity to have the leader come before Scrutiny Committee before you know, Council's AGM next year. So I would want to see that retained in the programme. But I think if we were to agree to move the homelessness strategy and the light bulb projects further down the road, or turn them into pending rather than active items, then we could accommodate the 3 items that have been raised tonight. So again, are there any views from members of the committee on that proposal?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll actually support you on this. I think it's a very good idea. Just from my own experience the last few years on each of those plans, strategies that we use, and both projects are very, very good. I think certainly the people that have contacted me needing assistance, the team's been very good. They're under a lot of pressure with high demand. Homelessness doesn't just mean you're on the streets, it can often mean you're in different aspects. But yeah, it's very good to know. I totally agree, it should just be moved down the line. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Atherton.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, at the moment, we got one person in Melton who's literally homeless, but he's only passing through and he's refusing to accept help. On the main, we got a couple of sofa surfers, but again, they're being kind of sorted into different areas where they need extra support. So I support your notion to postpone them for another time. Yep.
Any other comments? in that case, I'm going to turn to Michelle just in terms of, so we've got the 3 items. Can we, yeah, in terms of capacity and resources, are you confident we could include these as suggested?
Yeah, so with the items that you've proposed to either postpone or take off, and those that you've added, you've taken 2 things away from me and given me 3. So it's an early Christmas present for me. So no, that they're really important areas. They're ones that I think we can, you know, give you the right information to be able to make some informed recommendations to cabinet, and no issues with that at all. Just reflecting on the 2 items that you're proposing to take off, I'm really clear that I know that they're still really valued by members, and I think if you chose to bring them forward next year, you know, or much further into the work programme, we could show you those things in delivery. So it would just be a different stage of consideration for the committee. So no issues from my perspective. We can service those. Thank you.
Okay, so any further contributions anyone wants to make? If not, I think I'll move to a proposal, which is that we add to the work programme items on the waste contract, social housing allocations and the complaints procedure, and defer the items on the homelessness strategy and the light bulb project. I'm making that as a proposal from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Atherton and Lumley, actually, never mind. And Thwaites. Okay, can I put it to the vote then? Those in favour of that proposal? Sorry, I should ask the question. Does anyone want to say anything further on the work programme before we move to the next item on the agenda? No, thank you. So item 6, climate change draft strategy consultation. And very pleased to welcome the Director for Growth and Regeneration and members of our team here tonight, and also the portfolio holder, Councillor Glancy. So over to you, Pranali, initially, I assume.
Thank you, Chair. Adam, can I just check the presentation? Are you able to put it up? So, councillors, the report in front of you is about the consultation on the climate change strategy that we have been developing over the last year or 2. Had a pre-briefing with the chair and the vice chair about the meeting, and there was a request from the chair about setting the context and provide sorry. Sorry about that, and providing additional information to set the context about what other things the council is doing on this agenda. So while this was not part of the actual scope of the work, I hope that this additional information presented as part of this PowerPoint presentation will be helpful in setting the context. I would say the main focus would need to be the climate change strategy, which we are now out for consultation currently, and it will be presented to the council for approval early next year, following the further work done by the members working group. So that needs to be the key focus for the scrutiny committee's agenda. But I will start with, as I said, setting the background context, so you also have that understanding of additional work being done. And if you have any further questions, or if the scrutiny committee would like to dig more deeper into the additional context that I provide today, then more than happy to have further discussion or even an informal workshop session if that's what members would want. So if I go through the presentation, Adam, thank you. There are, so we as a council declared a climate change emergency in 2019, and then of course the COVID took over for a while, but we did undertake a very wide-ranging consultation last year, and also signed up to the Leicestershire's wide Climate and Nature Pact. The two pieces of work broadly the council is working on currently is one, to prepare a borough-wide strategy, which is the generic strategy that includes not just council's action, but for the whole borough, all our businesses, all our communities and our residents, what actions we need to take, what kind of impact we are having or we need to make over the climate change agenda. But the second piece of work, which is the more specific work about what council is doing, where we stand, what are our emissions, and working out exactly what we need to do over the next few years and how we allocate resources, whether it's budgets or staffing to actually make the difference. Next, please. So this is just to give you an idea. If you look at the wider Melton Borough's local area greenhouse gas emissions, you can see that public sector plays a very tiny role into that. And we as a council, as part of that public sector, has even more smaller a role to play in this. So, and that's why the focus needs to be on that wider placemaking, the influence that we have over the borough through various powers that we have and various influence we have over our communities. Our direct actions will only have a small role to play in this, but our influence over our businesses and our communities could have a much wider impact. Next, please, Adam. And this is again how various ways the council can influence. So again, as you can see, our direct control is a smaller part, but apart from that, we can do quite a lot of work around the procurement and commissioning, around the place shaping, around showcasing and demonstrating what other areas of the country are doing to address this agenda and the challenges, to look at working within partnerships and engaging our communities. So there is officer-led, political leadership led actions, as well as, again, considering the overall measurement, looking at performance, monitoring on a varying scale of complexity. So there is a much more wider role the council could have to play in shaping this agenda. And that's what the strategy is proposing to do. Next, please, Adam. So as I say, two pieces of work, the wider place leadership, which is part of the main strategy, which is in front of you today, and the direct control of council's own action, which is what I'm talking about. So we have commissioned a baseline study in 2019 to work out exactly what our emissions are through our council's service delivery. And we have also looked at it 3 years down the line now, where we are, what change we have made or not, and what path we need to take if we are serious about reducing our emissions over the next decade or so. So next one, please. I will pass it on to now Alex to talk about how these various emissions, what is the national guidance. We need to make sure that all our performance is the way we measure our performance is in line with all other councils, all other regions within the national agenda that we comply to. And there is a comparable information we provide to members. So Alex, if you go through the scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, what does that mean? And then what the baseline study has shown us. Thank you.
Thanks, Manali. Like I say, we produced a baseline study, and that was produced by APSI, which is like a local council government scheme. So they're an independent body, and they produced our 2019-2020 baseline study. We've then produced a new one, which is in-house, and we've used the Local Government Association calculator to do this. So I'm just going to briefly explain the 3 different scopes, and these are emissions types. So there's a scope 1, which is our direct emissions, and this is from our own council activities, but specifically involved in regards to the combustion of engines, such as our own council vehicles, and combustion from boilers. Now, scope 2 is specifically around the purchase of electricity, so it's emissions from the grid. And then scope 3 is our indirect emissions as a consequence of the council's actions that occur at other sources. So, for example, our leased assets, so the energy that's used at our leisure centres is scope 3, and the employee travel that's undertaken is scope 3, and waste is scope 3 as well. If you go to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So the key statistics from the 2019-2020 data is that over the scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions of our operations, we produce 5,702 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. So you will see this measurement throughout the presentation. So CO2 tonnes equivalent is basically any gases that are not CO2. So for example, nitrogen or methane, then that is converted into CO2. So that's what the equivalent means. So from the baseline study that was produced in 2019-2020, the high emitters for us was our housing stock, it was our leased assets, contractor travel such as BIFA, and our own gas usage, so in our own buildings that is not leased. And as you can see from the pie chart there, scope 3 is our highest emitter. However, scope 3 is the one we had the least control over. So we have the most control over scope 1 and scope 2, because that is literally what we actually use. And scope 3 is a lot more other factors involved. If you just go to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So like I say, we've undertaken an in-house review of the baseline study, and we have actually got some data now from 2022, 2023, the financial year. So this data that we're showing you now, it only includes scope 1 and 2 and some of the scope 3 emissions, but it doesn't include the council housing. This is because we couldn't get a direct comparison between the two data sets. So we've omitted this from these slides and from the data going forward. So as you can see, we've got some good news in that we have reduced our carbon footprint by about 12% since 2019-2020. So that's around 178 tonnes of CO2 equivalent, which is really good. And this is using data that we've collected over the last year and using that and putting it into that calculator. Next slide, please. So looking specifically at scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, so we've decreased them by 21%. So scope 1 and scope 2, like I say, is looking at gas usage, vehicles and electricity usage as well. And they all then go into the kind of usage of emissions from the grid. So basically, what has happened, as you're aware, is that the council uses a hybrid system now of working, which is really great because it means obviously colleagues get more of a flexibility. What has actually happened as well is we've actually reduced our energy usage in our buildings. So as you can see there, Parkside has been decreased by 23% and Phoenix House has decreased by 7%. But what I would say is that is now plateaued. So the hybrid working, we're probably at a plateau area of the hybrid working. We're not going to get any less people working in the building and probably not any more. So to move on now and get these decreases further, we actually are going to need to make changes to our buildings. That what we're recommending is therefore energy audits are undertaken of the buildings, which will actually illustrate to us what we can do to make these buildings more energy efficient. So that's what we've recommended going forward. So if you go to the next slide, please, that would be great. So looking at scope 3 emissions as well. So emissions, again, because of the hybrid working, it has fallen overall from employee commuting by around 128 tonnes, which is great, which is really, really good. Looking at our contractor travel, so this is BIFA, this is decreased by 3.6 tonnes, but as you probably aware, we're having a lot of housing growth within the borough, and it is likely that will increase as more houses become available, as there is more streets for BIFA to go down. And I can take a question if you want.
Councillor Atherton.
So how has BIFA decreased in the first place? Because unless they reduce the services, how can it decrease?
Yeah, so basically what's happened is they removed a 14-ton truck from their stock between the two different data sets. So the only decrease is because of this very, very large vehicle. So that's what I'm saying. It is very likely if Biffa do not change their vehicles to be non-fossil fuel vehicles, that figure will constantly increase because they're going to be doing more rounds because they've got to go to more houses. So that's why it has decreased because of that specific vehicle that has been removed from the stock. So business travel has actually increased. So we need to look at that going forward as to how we can look at that as a council. So that is NBC employees going out around the borough and doing business travel. And then the emissions from our leisure centres, that is Waterfield and the Melton Sports Village, has also increased as well since 2019, 2020 to 2022, 23. Have spoken to some colleagues at the leisure centres, everyone active there, and they say that because of the COVID outbreak, they now undertake a lot more ventilation of the buildings, and that obviously uses a lot more energy to ventilate those buildings. So that could be, we've not looked at it completely because we haven't done an energy audit of the building yet, but that is likely to be a reason why it has increased. Next slide, please, Adam. So I did say that we haven't got a direct comparison data for the council housing, but we have got some data for the council housing, what's been going on. So we have had some projects going on, as you're hopefully aware. We've had a local authority delivery scheme that has supported 53 properties in installing 10 extra wall installations and 43 solar installations as well. So overall, those mechanisms and those measures that have been put in place should be saving 54 tonnes of CO2 per year, which is brilliant. But like I say, what we need to do now is move forward, is get some improved data from our housing stock on EPC data. And what we're recommending is that obviously the HRA business plan has outlined how there's measures in there about how to make our housing stock net zero, and that's where we're recommending that is carried out, and that we proceed with the HRA business plan. We're also recommending that obviously if there's more grant schemes that come available, like the local authority delivery scheme or other schemes that are available, that they are used and trying to bid for them. That is something that we're definitely recommending going forward. But yeah, so that's kind of where we are. That's a picture and a bit of a comparison between the 2 years. We have obviously made some good strides ahead, but we then want to kind of, obviously we know we need to improve things going forward as well, but those actions that we're recommending they will be within the action plan, which would obviously go towards council to be approved.
Okay, yes, thank you. Thanks, Alex. Next slide, please. Thanks. Yes, I'm just going to run through some of the things that we've done so far. Obviously, Alex has just explained that we have made progress. Our carbon emissions have reduced, but we've got a long way to go. And the APSI report, it didn't just state what our carbon footprint is now or was. It also gave recommendations and a trajectory, and we've used that information to construct our draft internal action plan going forward. So the idea is that we're focusing on scope 1 and 2 emissions because they're the ones we've got most control over. So when we set our targets back in 2019, we didn't have this amount of information. We've now got more information to make more of an informed decision about where our target should lie in the future, and what emissions, what boundaries we should set over those emissions. And the 1 and 2 emissions are where we've got most control. So our target is going to be on those emissions to get maximum impact. We've also spoken to different departments across the council to see where we are now and what is possible going forward into, say, the next 2 or 3 years, what they can do. And obviously, they're all working towards reducing emissions every service area. But if we want to accelerate action, we need to put more resources in terms of finance and staff capacity into climate change action. Otherwise, we can't move things forward as quickly as we want. We've also assessed the latest government guidance. Obviously, recently there's been changes in the government's messaging on climate change as well. And so all of that information is feeding into our internal action plan. Next slide, please. That focus on scope 1 and 2 emissions is obviously that's where our focus is going to be on the internal action plan. That doesn't mean we're not going to look at scope 3 emissions, which is where the council housing stock is, and that's a substantial amount of our carbon footprint. So we've already taken action over the last few years on our council housing stock, and you can see, I'm not going to go through all of these measures that we've done, but there's various different energy efficiency measures in there, like external wall installation, solar PV, new boilers. So quite a lot of work, is you can clearly see, has been done. There's more planned in the future at the bottom. So there is progress on decarbonising our council housing stock, and it's not just decarbonising, it's going to make those homes more comfortable, warmer for residents, and cheaper to live in as well. So there's other co-benefits as well. Next slide, please. We've also been pretty successful in securing and utilising government grant funding for energy efficiency programmes. So in 2022, we installed solar PV systems to 26 eligible private sector households. This year, we've used government grant funding to improve 28 private sector properties of low income. The focus is the money on low income households. And it's also on a fabric first approach, which is installation first before you then might fit, for example, solar panels or low carbon heating systems. And most recently, we've secured over £1 million for home upgrade grant funding phase 2. And that's potential to upgrade 60 properties across the borough. And quite a lot of that funding is being delivered through partnership work with other district councils and Leicestershire County Council. It's called the Green Living Leicestershire programme, and you should have received correspondence around Hug 2 as well. So hopefully you did that. You received that. If we want to, as Alex said, decarbonise our building stock, you need access to government funding. There is a public sector decarbonisation fund. But to get access to that, we need to do energy audits. We've already got energy audits for our leisure centres. So that's work that's already been done. We've submitted bid for solar panels and pool cover for Waterfield as well. But we've also imminently going to have energy audits for other buildings, Parkside and Phoenix House, because they're the buildings that are well, the considerable amount of CO2 has been emitted from those buildings because of obviously gas and associated electricity usage. So energy audits are being commissioned for those buildings, and then we can use that information to basically produce a decarbonisation report for our buildings and use that information then to bid for government funding. But you need to put that in first. And through the Midlands Net Zero Hub, we are getting grant funding for 12 EV charge points with a solar canopy. That's at Chapel Street car park. So that works in progress. Again, that's a partnership scheme. So a lot of the work we're doing is through different partners. We have to involve different partners because that's the way, particularly for a smaller council, we can utilise our funding, pool it together and make more progress. I think that's me. Thank you.
I think these final slides are talking about climate change. As you can appreciate, it is a very wide agenda, and all parts of the council are contributing towards doing something to achieve reduced emissions and improving our environment. So whether it's all our strategies or our policies and procedures or our governance framework, climate change slowly is getting embedded in the way we do it and how we do it and everything that we do. So I'm not going into detail, but I'm just wanted to give you an overarching understanding that all these plans, all actions that council does now do consider climate change as a key implication before finalizing anything. Next, please, Adam. So in terms of our approach, how we have approached it so far, if I just summarize what Alex and Chris just talked about, is that we are looking at aligning our net zero targets and timescales to the local plan delivery, as well as our corporate strategy, which is the 2036 vision. So if we are able to achieve net zero situation for our own service delivery by 2036, that will be a really good alignment of all our efforts into one direction. Adopting the climate change strategy is a key action, which is what you are going to be considering today. Engaging with council staff and members. So this is all about behavioral change. It's not just spending money and achieving physical changes. It's about how we do things and how we think about environmental impacts in the way we do it. So looking at wider raising awareness about all the things we can do or should do. Looking at all our policies and future actions and projects, as I just talked about, that it's getting embedded in the way we do it. Coordinating all actions for wider monitoring of performance, what we are achieving through it or not, but also more importantly, getting ourselves ready for receiving external funding wherever that's possible. Next, please, Adam. So basically, we are suggesting to focus on scope 1 and 2 emissions and then look at reducing scope 3 emissions wherever possible by secondary actions. How we do it? Well, we are also working in parallel on the asset development plan, which includes work on Parkside, Phoenix House, and other corporate assets. While we are looking at refurbishment, why not look at energy efficiency measures at the same time? So it reduces additional cost, but it improves our business case for doing this work. So it's not additional burden for council's finances. It's making sure that these implications are considered as part of the design at an early stage. Similar to leisure procurement, I know Michelle's team has been working on the procurement of leisure operator, who are also considering what we can do with our leisure centers and again, improving energy efficiency in those buildings. While we are developing the designs for Stockyard through the leveling up funding, looking at energy efficiency measures embedded as part of the design rather than an add-on at a last minute. As you saw from Chris's presentation, HRA business plan definitely embraces all the environmental implications within their main objectives and priorities, and also sets out plans and actions to deal with that. And the last bit, we haven't yet worked out exactly how and what we are going to do is offsetting, because it's a last resort. If we can't achieve our targets through our primary and secondary actions, then offsetting is always a tool available to us as a council. And that's something we need to consider going forward as part of the strategy discussion, that what we can do, how we offset some of our measures, hard to achieve measures which we absolutely cannot reduce. Next slide, please, Adam. Thank you. And the last slide, this one, to talk about what is the work that is being considered, as I said, about the HRA business plan, the leisure procurement, the grant funding bid we have submitted for swimming pool, as well as solar panels for Waterfield, the local plan review, that is a major piece of work, and the review does include all the environmental policies and its impact on the development and place shaping of the borough. The asset management plan does considers all our corporate assets and looking at energy audits to seek decarbonization grant funding from government, and also looking at funding for EV charging points. So all these pieces of works are being undertaken. So that's the kind of background, and I will stop at that if you have any clarification questions on that before we move on to the actual item, which is the strategy itself, which Nick will talk about. So thank you.
Okay, any questions on what we've heard so far? Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, going back a bit, I really do think it's great that you're suggesting to Biffa to change their lorries, their bin lorries, because as you say, when they stop and start, it must be no end of emissions coming out. So I really think that's brilliant if you can get them to do that eventually. But also I've noticed buses just outside of the town centre. I've noticed drivers, not all drivers, but some drivers, they stop and then they get out of their bus and have a cigarette and leave the bus running. So all that emissions are coming out. So I know years ago to do with Windsor Street, because they used to do that down Windsor Street, these bus drivers, and they were stopped. But so I think we still need to have a word with them to make sure that, you know, that this doesn't happen again, because it has been happening quite regularly over the years. It has at this particular place. Also as well, to do with recycling. Now, I had a letter some years ago. I mean, it went out to everybody, to all the residents, to clean out their tins and what have you, you know, to me, before they discard them, you know, if they've got anything in them, because they're having to throw away bags of recycling because it's mold and it's spread inside, depending on how long they leave it, obviously, before they get to sort them out at the centre. So I think perhaps if we could send letters out to residents and perhaps to try and encourage them that before they throw anything out, that they could just rinse their things out and dry them and then put them into the recycling bags. I think that's the way to go with this, because it's such a shame, because we're trying our hardest to get it right. And it's such a shame that we have to send more things to the sites, you know, where we have to get rid of rubbish and stuff. And it's such a shame, because it would be great if we could do this, because there's more for recycling. And so it's just something to consider. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Any other points of clarification? Councillor.
If you want to cut the emissions by a great big percentage, contact the county council. When the parents park outside the school from October to March, April, the engines are running and the emissions, well, must be sky high. Despite going and, you know, saying to the head, could you send a note out? But I'm sure every school has got the same problem.
Councillor Atherton.
Mine's slightly different. Parkside is not occupied at its full capacity, is it? Wouldn't it be useful, instead of heating and using emissions in two places, Phoenix House and this one, to combine it into one, to save energy and be more climate friendly?
So yeah, all these are very helpful suggestions. I think what Councillor Gordon and Councillor Child talked about is about behavior change. And there is a lot of work we could do in terms of communication, raising awareness, because it's not difficult, isn't it? It doesn't require an infrastructure or funding to make those kind of behavioral changes by people. So yes, there is, and Nick will talk about it as part of communication and engagement with our communities, that there's quite a lot of work about raising that awareness about the implications of our day-to-day actions on this agenda that we could do. In terms of Parkside, yes, very valid point, and we'll definitely add it as part of consideration through the asset development plan. Yeah.
Thank you. I actually hit on a sore point with me, because there's a school on my road, and I'm in danger of bringing the council into disrepute with my exchanges with some of the parents who park there, but I have to bite my lip sometimes. Just a question I would like to ask, and it's about offsetting, which you mentioned at the end, and it's how that's measured. And to example, I decided to take a walk in Edgerton Park the other day to have a look at all the trees that the town and the state have planted. and they're very nice. And I realise that I'll be dead 20 years before they have any major impact. So I offsetting to me is a worry, because it's a very long-term thing. You know, you don't plant a tree today and have any major impact on carbon capture tomorrow, do you? I don't know whether there's any technical data on that you can enlighten me with.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's as Pranali said, it's a last resort. It's the last step in decarbonisation. So it's not the idea behind net zero. The spirit is that you reduce emissions to as low as you can possibly get them, and any hard to remove emissions are then offset. And then you may consider obviously tree planting schemes, ideally maybe within the borough. I mean, there's some figures around tree planting. A tree would probably store about 1 ton of carbon in every 100 years from a mature trees. But obviously it's time, isn't it? It's time, and we haven't got a lot of time really. So yeah, it's a slow process. I mean, there are other ways to offset as well. So there's solar installations and things like that. So I mean, that could offset 500 kilowatt solar installation could offset about 170 tons of carbon. So there are options available, but these are options you would take after you've tried everything else to reduce emissions to the lowest possible value, really.
Thank you for that. I think my point was, and I'll let you know, is that if treated as a last resort, you're then going to have an awful long time after you reach for the last resort before it has any impact. So if we're looking at tree planting, we should be getting on with it today, rather than waiting until 2036 and say we've missed our targets. I think that's really the issue I was subtly driving at.
Yes, well, I mean, there are other benefits for tree planting, not besides absorbing carbon. Yeah.
Nick, you there?
Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm going to very briefly talk about the strategy because I do have to leave for at 8 o'clock-ish because I have a small child that needs to go to bed. And that's why I'm not with you today, unfortunately. So the strategy is a very high-level document. It's a strategic document that's setting out sort of a framework for what the issues are locally, and it's trying to focus on what those specific local issues, because a lot of them are the same for globally or nationally. So we're trying to pick out those local issues, and also building up on all that community feedback we got from all that consultation work we did last year. And that's kind of where we started with the vision for the strategy, and some of those key principles about fairness and equality, and the co-benefits came very strongly out of that consultation. I think what's very strong in this from the local community is that a real deep care for the natural environment, particularly around the borough itself, and wanting to protect and preserve that, and that they want the council specifically to be a local leader on climate change. They want to see that the council is doing something, for them to be just transparent and to be honest, and to also deal with their sort of core business. So that was like, you've had discussions tonight about sort of waste collection and litter and things like that are really quite sort of strong key issues for local people. The strategy sets out in a very sort of high level and brief way. I've not gone into too much detail so we can get as many people to buy in as possible. Sort of what those key issues are and the kind of the key actions that will need to be done. And obviously those key actions will apply to us as an organisation as they apply to many others as well. And we've definitely kept that sort of natural environment as part of our Leicestershire Climate Nature Plaque as well, to keep that as part of the key theme of the strategy. So I'm not going to talk through the strategy, you've all seen it, because I have to leave within half an hour, I'm afraid. So I really wanted to give you as much opportunity as possible to ask me some questions on it.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the committee?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, great report and a lot of great words and a lot of great intent. The areas I struggle with is partly what Alex talked about a little bit, and it's the metrics around this, and actually understanding, well, what does net zero actually mean, and how do we know when we got there? Especially with the complication that Alex put forward, which is we've got a growing population, so you can't trying to do apples for apples as it changes and it moves forward. That to me is how we actually make that simple, how we make that sort of quite plain, and actually how we demonstrate to the outside world that we have actually achieved those. And it also comes down to those metrics and understanding those metrics. The presentation that went through earlier was excellent. It started looking at some of those, and I think as we've talked in the past, the next step is the one where it becomes even more difficult to actually understand each of those actions and how they actually have an effect, and is it having the effect that we wanted and expected. So there's just a general comment around that.
I think the growing population is really important because our population isn't just growing, it's aging significantly at the same time. So you're also getting people who are much more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change as a population ages, particularly overheating in the summer months. So it is a really key thing to consider.
Any other comments, questions?
Sorry, there's just one other one then. And everything we've talked about tonight is how we can, what we can do ourselves and what we can do. But I think it's how we can actually influence the outside world as well. There's the industry, you know, and talking about solar panels or whatever, every industry, every building, industrial building should have a solar panel on it. You know, how do we encourage that? How do we use the government? Well, because I know this is where we sort of get a problem between there's ourselves, there's the county, and then there's the government trying to do those initiatives. But it's how do we support those? How do we actually put those into action? Because that's where the massive effect is going to take place. That's where the large effect we can get the power, a bang for our buck sort of thing is outside almost.
Yeah, I remember a conversation I had recently with an architect, and he was saying, I really want people to build green homes, but when I try and show them something locally, there isn't any examples to show them. To have some sort of organisation to build net zero homes in the borough that you can see and say, look, this is what you could have. That's showcasing that part of those sort of wider powers and influences we've got can be a really important factor. We've certainly gone out to the consultation last time and this time to all of the major employers because we recognise them to be key. And they have their own sustainability strategies and plans themselves. Some of them are really quite keen to do things, and a lot of businesses are really quite keen. And what was very interesting from the first consultation is there's not a resource or money issue necessarily for quite a few of those businesses. They're just more nervous about whether that'll have a knock-on effect on their customers and demand for their products and things like that. So there's definitely work to do there, but that's more through us supporting local businesses, business partnerships and things like that.
It's very quiet. You may be able to read extra bedtime stories at this rate, Nick. If nobody else wants to make a comment, I had a whole page of notes here. And I'm not sure whether they're questions or observations. And I also highlighted a lot of sections of the report. And I mean, you can if you find a question in this, Nick, you can answer it, but it may just be I'm just saying what I think. I mean, I found the report incredibly informative. I feel much better informed and have a much better grasp on a whole range of issues that need to be addressed. I think the analysis was extremely helpful. But at the end, when I got to the end of it's page 78 on our papers, I found myself feeling not particularly hopeful that we'd actually reach many of the aspirations set out. And I don't think it should be a problem for us to say that there are all sorts of hurdles, and the theme that comes up again and again is around funding, and it's about buy-in, and it's about actually being, the limits of our power as a council to make change. When you read the consultation, I mean, in para 5.8 of the covering report, people say they were really concerned, overwhelmingly support local action to tackle climate change and want us to do more faster. And the report doesn't really set out to do more faster agenda, does it? It sets out, because we're constrained by all sorts of issues. It sets out hopes that things can change, but it gives no guarantee that things can change, which is why we end up with at the last resort, we've got offset. There are some things the council can do within its power in the way it organises its work and etc. But a lot of the issues you flag up, I find myself feeling quite pessimistic about us actually achieving those targets. And I think as a council, we need to be maybe amplifying the hurdles more. The lack of funding, the lack of commitment from and I'm going to say central government, but actually I'm not being political on this because I don't feel very confident across the whole political spectrum about this. Because what I don't want is people to think we're trying to flannel them, and that we're being honest about the challenges set out. So they were really just my observations, and that doesn't detract at all from the huge amount of work the officers have undertaken and their commitment and passion around this issue, which I've sensed. All the climate change working group. That's a bit self-serving because I'm on that. Anyway, that was really the comments I wanted to add. I don't know if anyone else, whether you want to comment on anything I've just said, Nick, or anybody else from the officers here tonight.
I'm glad that you found it informative, because that's kind of one of the main purposes of that strategy, is to get that understanding out there a bit more about all those different issues and things that we need to look at. That there are challenges, and they are different for all of us. But I think the strategy sets out that framework for us to start addressing those.
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously, if we want people in the wider borough to change their behaviour and take action on climate change, we as a council have to lead by example as well. That's critical as well.
No, I would agree with that. I mean, just being anecdotal, I had a conversation with a neighbour today, and I turned to saying, "How's your little?" He's recently moved in, and I said, "How's your little girl doing at the school, which is 50 yards up the road?" And he then told me, well, she doesn't go there. She was offered a place, but she goes to Sherrard on the other side of town, because that's where the grandmother lives who picks the child up from school. And it just brought home to me the complexities of changing behaviour. That was an economic necessity, because the childcare requires the grandparents to actually collect the child from school at the end of the day. So all those extra miles are being driven every day. So when I say I agree entirely when you say we should set an example and lead, but my pessimism comes from understanding just what a challenge it is to get behaviours changed. Councillor Sharp and then Councillor Lumley.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point. Would they be able to tell us what sort of percentage of LED lights the council use on the whole of their properties?
So haven't got that data at hand, but we can definitely inform you on that.
I mean, with this plan and strategy we've seen tonight, it's very good. I'm just concerned that Alex, even though you've done a great job with your statistics of how many, like, as a council office and our property, how much we're actually, like our CO2 emissions. It's just, I just rather we actually focus on trying to be like common sense screens, such as trying to plant trees, trying to bring that forward. This is what I've brought up before, and other things that we're planning. Because I've just, for example, you just brought up, Chair, about school places. All of our schools, all of our secondary schools in the town at least are full. So parents have contacted me saying they've got to send their kids now to other schools about 15, 20 miles away, up to 15, 20 miles away. So what I'm trying to say is, I think whatever we save here, it actually grows in another way. We've got a huge growing population around the country. There's going to be more people actually starting to breathe out CO2, and we can't control that. I would say as well, a lot of cars being built in the last 15, 20 years now, certainly last, say, 10 years, 5-10 years, are very green now. They're a lot more less emissions. Aircraft as well, they're a lot more efficient. So that's, and the places which weren't particularly good at recycling, such as, the big chains, they've hugely improved their plans now. So I think we are going in the, I think we are going in the right direction. Just on Councillor Thwaites' point about, you know, what does net zero actually mean? It's a very good point because, you know, when I read about heat pumps, they are not green at all. I mean, people, the articles, these are proper articles, are not sort of politically biased, but they're saying that they do not heat up places as they should. You know, they actually say that sort of like gas boilers are a lot more efficient. We're speaking to one of our developer consultants, plus have put an application in for properties in our borough, and he says, you know, I don't think we're going to touch heat pumps because they're very expensive and they just don't heat up properties. Another thing as well is when you get parts of the country having a some sort of like 20 mile per hour set speed limit, it actually causes more CO2 because you've got the vehicles having to go very slow to try to keep at that 20 miles per hour, and you've got the police after them with fines if they don't, and it takes journeys a lot longer. So that's not green. And then there's there are other factors as well. I could go on, but we've just got to be careful that whatever green means, it actually doesn't necessarily mean that we are actually going green. We've just got to be very common sense about it, which is why I'm for, you know, planting trees as such, because I think one of our officers at County Hall has said that we're one of the lowest parts of the country in terms of actual, you know, sort of like green, sort of like shrubbery, such as trees and that, hedges. So I'd rather we focus on that, and then also I'd rather we actually focus on actual things that we're going to do as opposed to trying to keep getting sort of like statistics all the time on this particular week, on this particular month. I think we said 0.01 X number of tons. I'm not really bothered, I have to say. I'd rather we just focus on trying to be green and just try to get the things that are common sense to try to, you know, actually make us a greener area. And, you know, of that all, as a country, we only contribute sort of like 0.1% to our emissions. China and India are actually building 60 coal-fired power stations every year. I mean, so whatever we do, it's nothing compared with what's going on around the world. So we've just got to be very, very careful the way we go. Thank you.
Any other? Oh, Councillor Atherton, sorry.
I think we got to start somewhere. And I think we got to start here, because if we as a council not doing our best to be more green, the rest of our borough won't do anything either, because why should they if we are not doing it? And every journey starts with taking the first step. So we can't control the rest of the world. We can't control China, India, or anywhere else. But if we don't make the first step, my grandchildren or my great-grandchildren might not have a planet to live on. So I think it's really important that we do take our first step and we start here. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for that, Councillor Atherton. I can't help but make the observation that the only reason China is building so many power stations is so it can make all the televisions, washing machines, hoovers, etc., that we buy here. So in a sense, we've stopped making them here and exported our pollution to another part of the world. So it's probably a more complex argument. That's just me being a bit provocative. Any other observations people want to make?
I'd share just quickly, just while we've got a planning officer on here, is that one thing that we're not very good at this council is that there's some things that trying to be green we're not very good at. For example, in my ward about 3 or 4 years ago, we had an application built for those Persimmon homes. They chopped down a lot of trees that they shouldn't have done. They weren't really, I don't think any actions were taken with them. I think Persimmon offered us as a council, if I remember rightly, about £5,000 compensation, and Ankle Hill was the same. And I don't think we seem to take any proper action against these, because some of them are awful. But I think we need to focus on this sorts of things as opposed to trying to tax people more. I'm not saying we're going to tax people because I'm anti these, but I just think we ought to focus on these little bits and bobs that aren't in the news often. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lumley. Any other? Councillor Cliff then. Yeah.
So something that has really struck me throughout the report, which I want to echo the other comments about how excellent it is. And I can really recognise the amount of hours that have gone into this by officers. So really want to register my thanks for that. I think it's really important and shows great imagination and great leadership. Because what runs through it is that this is not statutory. You don't have to do any of this, which I find quite concerning. But what my question is are there any other local authorities that are comparable to us that are also moving ahead with this type of work, that there can be any learning from, or are we kind of unique in following something that isn't statutory?
Unfortunately, we are one of the last authorities to take the strategy work on board. Yes, most authorities around the country are embarking on this agenda. That's the government guidance to consider it at all stages. Some authorities, particularly more unitaries, have got more developed strategies, wider pots of funding, and they are doing some fantastic exemplar work. Actually, we have been considering at the members working group for the climate change agenda, looking at examples of elsewhere of best practice, what other councils are doing and how they are doing it. And that may be another thing. It will be useful to share with wider members within the council, because there's definitely a lot we can learn from that. It has been a huge learning curve for all of us in the last 4 years, and we have come far, but there's much more to do and more to learn. So yeah, we can look at examples. Chris, you want to comment?
Yeah, because I was just going to say the work that we've done on the baseline study that Alex was talking about in terms of putting costings and recommendations to what we should do to decarbonise our own council operations. That not a huge number of councils have done that work. We've got the evidence now that we can use to create a good quality action plan to make sure that it's realistic and what we can achieve. Yes, we'd like more resources, and we'd go out and seek those resources, but the resources we've got, and we can see now where we've got to get to, and that work has been done, and not all councils have done that work. They've just created an action plan or a strategy without collecting that evidence to start off with. We've now got the evidence and we've created an action plan based on it. So that puts us in some ways ahead of other councils.
I just wanted to remind members that we are into consultation period, which runs up to the end of January. So any comments you have, good or bad, or any constructive steer that we could be looking into, please do let us know. And even after consultation, you can still provide comments, but it will be useful while the working group will consider all the comments in February, March time. The plan is for approval of the strategy by Cabinet and Council around April or May, depending on how quickly we can go through the comments, how many changes, if we have to make any changes to the strategy itself, and what comes out of the action plan. So there's a fair amount of work to do, but it will be good to have a strategy approved as soon as we can, because that provides a framework, and then we can start pinning down on actual actions and delivering them on ground. So yeah, any comments will be very welcome.
Thank you, Pranali. Councillor Clancy.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me along this evening. And I haven't said very much because obviously the experts sitting either side of me have been very sort of good in their description of where we are today, and also Nick on the screen. It's been quite a long journey, and I think we've achieved quite a lot to actually get to this point now. We still have a lot to do, but we can all play our part in that. And I really welcome your comments this evening. They've been very, very useful. And as Pranali said, if you have any further comments, then please send them in, because every little bit that we get can help us formulate an improved picture of where we are at the moment. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for that. If there are no further questions, it wasn't too painful, you see, Pranali. Yeah. I'd just like to nobody else. I mean, just to close the item by just emphasising. I mean, I hope I'm a critical friend on this. And I'm certainly committed and will support everything we can do. I just want to be honest about the things we're prevented from doing, which is the essence. And then the final, and this has just occurred to me, scrolling back over the report. I just wonder whether one of the things we could be looking at as part of standard processes, we carry out equality impact assessments on anything that's coming before council. Climate change assessments should perhaps be built in as part of how we actually look at issues that come before for decision. Just so that it's automatically picked up, because people won't always pick up a 70-page strategy and say, "Well, let me just remind myself what I ought to be doing." On that note, I'd just like to say thank you ever so much for everybody who's attended this evening, particularly the officers and Councillor Glancy. And as there's been no urgent business notified to me, I'll call the meeting to a close. Thank you.